Welcome to the deep dive. Forget deciphering dense legal documents today. We're cutting straight to the chase. A recent court decision involving Google and the digital advertising technology markets, and what it really means for the nuts and bolts of the online advertising world.
Exactly. Think of this as your backstage pass to understanding a ruling that, while it comes from the legal realm, well, it has the power to shake up how ads are bought and sold right across the internet.
Right, so our mission today, for everyone listening, is basically to explain what this decision signals for the future of online advertising.
And the potential knock-on effects, for the websites you visit, the ads you see, and maybe even the companies trying to reach you.
And to get there, we're diving into the core of it all, the memorandum opinion from the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia. Let's get started.
Okay, so to understand why this ruling matters so much for the ad industry, you kind of need a quick look at how we even got here. Advertising's been around forever, right? Town criers, billboards.
Print, radio, TV, the usual suspects.
Yeah, but the internet, that just changed everything. Suddenly you have this massive new frontier.
Absolutely. I mean, billions of people with internet-connected smartphones. It became this incredible opportunity, almost a gold mine for advertisers.
Not just reach, but the ability to collect user data, to understand who those audiences were. That was the game changer.
And that ability, that data, it really fueled the growth of so much of the free stuff online we take for granted.
Totally. Think about it. Search engines like, well, Google or Bing,
Yeah.
social media like Facebook, news sites, so many rely heavily on that ad revenue. It's the basic trade-offs.
It's how they offer content without charging you directly. It's fundamental.
Right, but compare that to, say, HBO Max, where you pay a subscription, or Nike, where you're buying shoes. It's a different model.
But the old way of doing ads, those three martini lunch negotiations,
Yeah, those manual deals, they just couldn't scale, couldn't handle the sheer volume and speed of the internet.
so that's where programmatic advertising comes in, the automated system.
Exactly. It's the automated way to buy and sell ad space in, like real time. Algorithms doing the work in milliseconds instead of weeks of calls.
It's like replacing that old school haggling with a super fast automated auction happening constantly behind the scenes.
Every single time a web page loads, essentially.
Okay, so who are the main players in this programmatic world? Who's actually running these auctions?
Well, we talk about the ad tech stack. Initially you had things called ad networks, kind of the first attempt.
Yeah.
But the modern system has a few core bits. Advertisers use what are called advertiser ad servers to manage their campaigns.
Okay.
And they use demand-side platforms, DSPs, to actually decide where to place ads and how much to bid. Think of a DSP like a stockbroker, but for ads. Google's is called DV360.
Got it. So advertisers use DSPs to find the right spots. What about the websites selling the space? The publishers?
Good question. On the other side, publishers, the websites with the content, they use publisher ad servers. Google's big one there is DFP, double-click for publishers.
And what does that do?
It helps them manage all the ad space they have available, run the auctions on their side, figure out what inventory to sell.
Okay, so DSPs for buyers, publisher ad servers for sellers. What connects them?
That's the ad exchange. Think of it like the marketplace, the New York Stock Exchange for ads. It connects all the DSPs with all the publisher inventory.
And runs that lightning fast auction you mentioned.
Precisely. It takes bids from the DSPs, ranks them, picks a winner, and boom, the ad gets shown. All in milliseconds. Google's big exchange is called AdX.
It sounds incredibly complex, like multiple sisters talking to each other instantly.
It is, and it happens billions of times a day. Every time you load a page with these kinds of ads, that whole chain reaction fires off.
Mind-boggling scale. Okay, so the lawsuit we're digging into today, it claimed Google was doing what exactly within this really intricate system?
The core allegation was that Google was unfairly dominating key parts of this ad tech ecosystem, using its position to monopolize.
And how did the court even define these parts? How do you carve up this complex industry into distinct markets for a legal case?
Yeah, that's crucial. The court looked at what products are, in their words, reasonably interchangeable. Basically, if a publisher or advertiser sees two tools as real substitutes for each other, they might be in the same market. It's about the commercial realities.
Okay, so based on that, which specific markets did the court actually find Google was monopolizing?
They identified two distinct relevant markets where they found Google had monopoly power. First one, publisher ad servers for for open web display advertising.
So specifically the tools publishers use for standard website banner ads and things like that.
Exactly. The court said these have a unique purpose managing and monetizing inventory for large web publishers. They have distinct features, like allocating space, handling bids, showing the ads, analytics.
And the pricing is different too, right? You mentioned that earlier.
Right. A key point was the different pricing or take rate. Publisher ad servers like DFP take a much smaller cut, maybe 1–2%, compared to an ad exchange like AdX, which might take around 20%. That really shows they do different jobs.
Did the court see evidence that the industry itself used these as separate things?
Yes, they pointed to how Google itself talked about DFP internally, how competitors like AppNexus or Equative saw the market, and how big publishers like Gannett or News Corp treated them. There was industry recognition.
And I assume Google argued this was slicing the market too thin, that these servers weren't that special.
They did. Google argued that things like ad servers for social media or in-app ads or video ads should all be lumped together.
But the court rejected that.
Yeah, the court said, look, the open web display market is different. Different ecosystem, different rules sometimes. Plus, they noted building one of these publisher ad servers is a massive undertaking, a huge investment. That's a barrier to entry.
Okay, so publisher ad servers is market number one. What was the second?
The second market was ad exchanges for open web display advertising. So AdX, basically.
And the reasoning was similar, unique function.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
The court saw exchanges as this critical go-between, the only thing that can collect and rank all those bids programmatically in milliseconds. Again, they cited industry recognition. Google, publishers, other ad tech firms all see exchanges as a distinct category.
Other tools just can't do that same real-time auction job.
Right. DSPs bid to exchanges. Publisher servers manage inventory before the exchange auction. The exchange is unique.
And Google's counter-argument here, also trying to broaden the definition.
Yeah, same strategy. They wanted to include exchanges for video, for apps, for social media. But the court focused again on the specific needs of open web publishers selling standard display ad space. They said those other exchanges weren't reasonable substitutes for this purpose.
Interesting. Now, the outline mentioned a market the court didn't find. Where did the claim fail?
Right. The plaintiffs also alleged a market for advertiser ad networks for open web display advertising. The court said no to that one.
What?
A few reasons. First, the term itself, advertiser ad network, isn't really standard industry language. Second, it kind of awkwardly only focused on the advertiser side, ignoring that many networks serve publishers too.
Okay, but more fundamentally.
More fundamentally, the court felt it just didn't match how advertisers behave. Advertisers, especially sophisticated ones, often don't just limit themselves to open web display ads.
They look broader.
Exactly. They're often comparing performance across display, maybe in-app ads, maybe social media ads, maybe search ads. They're looking for the best ROI wherever it comes from. They use DSPs to access lots of different inventory types.
So they're kind of platform agnostic, just chasing results.
That seemed to be the court's view. They also noted that even smaller advertisers using Google's own platform, AdWords, often bid into AdX and reach beyond just Google's own sites. So advertisers are substituting across different types of inventory, meaning a market limited only to open web display from the advertiser's net perspective didn't hold up.
Makes sense. What about Google's bigger argument? Didn't they say this whole ad tech stack is really just one big market, like a credit card system?
Ah, yes, the Amex argument. Google tried to say the whole ecosystem is a single two-sided transaction market, like Visa or MasterCard, where you need cardholders and merchants for a single transaction to happen.
But the court didn't buy that for ad tech.
No. They said, well, it doesn't really fit. Unlike a credit card swipe that needs both sides simultaneously, different parts of ad tech serve distinct customers. A company can just offer a DSP to advertisers, or just a publisher ad server to publishers. They aren't necessarily tied together in every transaction.
So you can have specialized firms focusing on one side or the other.
Precisely. The court acknowledged ad exchanges have two-sided aspects, connecting buyers and sellers. But the whole ecosystem doesn't function like one single, inseparable transaction platform in the way the Amex case described credit cards. It's more like related but distinct markets.
Okay, that clarifies the market definition part. And geographically, did the court limit this to the U.S.?
No, for both the publisher ad server market and the ad exchange market, the court found the relevant geographic market was worldwide.
Why global?
It reflects how the internet works, right? Users are global, advertisers target globally, The big ad tech companies operate globally with infrastructure everywhere, and Google implements its pricing and policies on a global basis. It
Yeah.
just didn't make sense to limit it geographically.
Okay, so step one, define the battleground. The court says Google has potential monopoly issues in the global markets for publisher ad servers and ad exchanges. Step two, what does monopoly power actually mean here?
In antitrust terms, it's basically the power to control prices or exclude competition. You can prove it directly, like showing they charge super high prices, or indirectly, usually by showing a really high and durable market share.
And what evidence convinced the court Google had this power in the publisher ad server market with DFP?
They pointed to DFP's huge market share, consistently around 91% globally for years. That number even matched Google's own internal estimates, which is telling.
91% is dominant.
Yeah, it's massive. The court also noted that people in the industry widely saw DFP as dominant, even calling it a monopoly.
But market share isn't everything, right? What about competition?
That was key. The court highlighted major barriers to entry and expansion. Building a competing server is incredibly complex and expensive.
And even if you build it,
Even if you build it, getting publishers to switch is really hard. DFP is deeply integrated into their workflow. Switching is costly, time-consuming, risky. Someone described it as akin to changing tires on a race car mid-race.
wow, so it's very sticky.
Extremely sticky. And the court noted that competitors have really struggled. Some big names exited the market or pivoted away, like OpenX getting out, Kevel changing focus. That lack of meaningful alternatives was strong evidence for monopoly power.
Okay, a really entrenched position for DFP. What about AdX in the ad exchange market? How did the court find monopoly power there?
For AdX, they had both direct and indirect proof. The direct evidence was AdX's high take rate, that 20% cut it takes from transactions.
You mentioned that earlier. Why is that direct evidence?
Because it had stayed that high for over a decade, even as the market matured and Google's own costs likely went down. And crucially, competitors tried offering lower take rates, but it didn't seem to really dent AdX's dominance or force Google to lower its price significantly. That suggests they weren't facing strong competitive pressure on price.
So they could charge more than a truly competitive market would allow.
That's the implication. There was even evidence Google internally questioned if the 20% rate fully reflected the value AdX provided, yet they kept it.
And the indirect evidence, market share again.
Yep. AdX's share of transactions among the exchanges that report data was consistently high, somewhere between 63% and 71%, roughly 9 times bigger than its next closest competitor.
9 times.
Yeah. And again, industry participants saw AdX as the dominant exchange. Plus, the barriers to entry are huge here too. You need massive scale, lots of buyers and lots of sellers for an exchange to work well. That creates network effects that benefit the incumbent.
The bigger you are, the more valuable you become, making it hard for others to catch up.
Exactly. And Google's vast data resources also give AdX an advantage in optimizing auctions and matching ads, another barrier for potential rivals.
So the court establishes Google has monopoly power in these 2 key areas. But having a monopoly isn't illegal itself, right? You have to misuse that power.
Correct. You need anti-competitive conduct. And the court found Google engaged in that, most significantly through unlawful tying.
Tying DFP, the publisher ad server, to AdX, the ad exchange.
Exactly. The court said, look, these are clearly 2 separate products. They do different things. They're priced differently. The industry sees them as different. And there's demand for publisher ad servers without necessarily using the same company's ad exchange.
So publishers should be able to choose the best ad server and the best exchange independently.
That's the principle. But the court found Google used its power in the ad exchange market, AdX, to effectively force publishers to also use its ad server, DFP.
How did they force them?
By making it difficult or impossible for AdX, Google's dominant exchange, to see and bid on inventory in real time unless the publisher was managing that inventory through DFP. Essentially, if you wanted the best access to AdX demand, you had to use DFP.
So it restricted publisher choice and leveraged AdX's power to boost DFP.
That was the finding. The court concluded this tying wasn't trivial. It had a not insubstantial impact on interstate commerce. And it significantly helps Google maintain its monopolies in both markets by disadvantaging competitors on both sides.
Were there other anti-competitive actions the court flagged besides the tying?
Yes, they mentioned a few other practices related to how DFP auctions favored AdX. Things like First Look, giving AdX an early peek and bidding advantage,
Okay.
and Last Look, which let AdX potentially win an auction even if another exchange had a higher initial bid, by getting a final chance to match or beat it.
Seems designed to give addicts an edge.
And also, sell-side dynamic revenue share, basically financial incentives for publishers that pushed more inventory towards ADX. The court saw these as part of a pattern of conduct reinforcing Google's dominance.
Did Google offer any justifications? Did they argue these things were actually good for users or the market?
They did. They argued these practices improved efficiency, lowered latency, increased publisher revenue, and ultimately benefited advertisers too. Pro-competitive justifications.
And the court's response?
The court largely found these justifications were either pretextual, not the real reason, or that any potential benefit was vastly outweighed by the harm to competition. Especially with the DFP-8X tie, the court concluded the main purpose was to gain and protect market power, not genuine product improvement that couldn't have been achieved in less restrictive ways.
Okay, this is incredibly complex, but the core finding seems clear. Google used its strength in one area, ADX, to illegally force adoption of its product in another, DFP, boxing out competitors. So, let's pivot to the big question. What does this mean for the ad industry? Forget the legalese for a second. What are the real-world shockwaves here?
Right, this is the crucial part. The finding of monopolization, the finding of unlawful tying. It's not just a slap on the wrist. It opens the door to potentially significant changes in how Google runs its whole ad tech business.
Changes like what? What are the possible outcomes?
Well, the court has basically said, okay, Google, you broke the law. Now we need to figure out the remedy. Both sides, the government and Google, have to propose solutions. And the big one everyone talks about is potential divestiture.
Divestiture, meaning Google might have to sell off parts of its ad business?
Exactly. Specifically, the court could order Google to sell off DFP, its publisher ad server, and AdX, its ad exchange, making them independent companies separate from Google Search, YouTube, and the rest of its operations.
Wow, that would be a seismic shift, as you said. What would a breakup like that actually do to the competitive landscape?
It could fundamentally reshape it. If DFP and AdX are independent, they'd potentially have to compete more aggressively on their own merits. It could open the door for rival ad tech companies, other DSPs, other publisher servers, other exchanges to gain a stronger foothold.
So more competition?
Potentially, yes. For publishers, it might mean more choices for how they manage and sell their ad space. Maybe better terms, better revenue shares if there's more competition for their inventory.
And for advertisers?
Advertisers could also benefit. A more competitive market might lead to more transparency, perhaps more efficient pricing for reaching audiences, more options beyond the Google ecosystem.
What about innovation? Does a dominant player sometimes stifle new ideas? Could a breakup spark more creativity?
That's definitely an impediment. When one company controls so much of the infrastructure, it can be harder for smaller, innovative players to break through. If you level the playing field somewhat, it might create more space for new technologies, new approaches to buying and selling ads, maybe better privacy solutions. Who knows?
It feels like it could inject a lot of dynamism back into the market.
It could. But there's also the flip side to consider.
Which is?
Well, this ecosystem, however flawed, powers a lot of the free content on the open web. How would a major structural change impact that? If publishers suddenly have more tools, maybe they made more money, which is good for content.
But if there's disruption?
If there's disruption, uncertainty, maybe technical challenges in separating these systems, could it temporarily harm publisher revenues? It's a complex equation with potential impacts on the very sustainability of some online business models.
Huge potential changes, but it's not a done deal yet.
Not by a long shot. First, Google will almost certainly appeal this ruling. That process takes time. Second, even if the finding of liability stands, the remedy phase, deciding what Google actually has to do, is a whole separate battle. Divestiture is on the table, but other remedies, like maybe behavioral rules about how Google operates, are also possible.
So we're watching a major drama unfold, but it's maybe only Act 1 or Act 2.
You could put it that way. This ruling is a huge plot point, but the final resolution is still being written.
Okay, so let's try to summarize the key takeaway then. The court found Google has monopoly power in two critical global ad tech markets, publisher ad servers, and ad exchanges for the open web.
Right. And crucially, it found Google engaged in unlawful tying between its dominant exchange, ADX, and its dominant publisher ad server, DFP.
And the potential fallout from this could be massive, possibly even leading to a breakup of Google's ad tech stack, with huge implications for competitors, publishers, advertisers, pretty much everyone in the digital ad world.
Exactly. Hopefully this deep dive has helped connect the dots between the legal findings and why this matters so much for the industry. It's about the plumbing of the internet economy, really.
And it definitely makes you as an internet user think, doesn't it? How might the websites you rely on be affected? Could the ads you see change? Will the balance of free versus paid content shift?
These are the big questions now. And if you're really interested, following the news around the remedies phase of this case will be fascinating, seeing what solutions are proposed and what the court ultimately decides.
It really leaves you with a final thought to chew on. Is this ruling a vital step towards a fairer, more innovative digital marketplace? Or could forcing such big changes risk disrupting the engine that powers so much of the online world we know today?
There are definitely strong arguments on both sides.
It's going to be one to watch for sure. The implications are huge.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.